You're listening to the Journey Podcast. How can we transform our patterns of dysfunctional relationships and create healthier dynamics? Listen to one amazing woman's story to find out more. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Overcoming dysfunctional relationships is a powerful and transformative journey that requires immense courage and resilience. In this episode, our guest shares her profound personal journey with abuse and how it has shaped her mission to help others heal from similar experiences. Through her own experiences, our guest offers insights and guidance on how to navigate the healing process from dysfunctional relationships. She shares practical strategies and tools for breaking free from patterns of abuse, rebuilding self-worth, and fostering healthy relationships. Anne Hellgren is the founder of Anne Hellgren Coaching, a relationship expert, certified coach, board member, and podcast host. She helps people live fulfilled, successful, and joyful lives through their relationship with themselves and others. Her expertise has helped her clients to gain the confidence, clarity, communication, connections, and mindset that have changed their relationships and many other areas of their lives. Her podcast, The Love You Want, It Starts With You, has a global audience and is ranked as one of the most shared podcasts globally by Spotify. Anne works with her clients on a deep level because she has experienced most of what she helps others through. Her own life experiences of past bad, abusive, and toxic relationships, as well as a contentious divorce, provide a level of understanding and empathy that is much valued by those she helps. She has combined her life experiences with her qualifications, that is, an MSc in Occupational and Organizational Psychology, a BSc in Counseling Psychology, NLP, and timeline therapy practices, amongst other qualifications, to create very impactful and empowering coaching programs. Being able to create bespoke programs for her clients' exact needs is one of her many areas of expertise. Without further ado, here is my interview with Anne Hellgren. Hi, Anne. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because overcoming dysfunctional relationships is such an important topic for mental well-being and holistic healing. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Petra, for having me on. Such an honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you here today. And for starters, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your own story?
Yes, sure. So in terms of how I started off in my world of coaching, I'm going to take you back a little bit. I was about 19 years old. I grew up in Sweden part of my life. And when I was 19 years old, I was dating this guy and I was standing in the flat. Both of us were standing in this flat in the hallway, beautiful, sunny, typical Scandinavian winter rather. And I got a phone call. So I picked up my phone and I said, hello. And at the other side of the call, the guy that I was dating then could hear it was a male voice. And then the next thing I knew, I'd fallen to the ground and he had punched me across the face. And it was the first time I'd actually ever been physically assaulted. And so I was laying there on the floor. I was terrified. I was screaming. I couldn't believe he'd done this. He'd never shown any signs, by the way, of this kind of behavior. So it was the pain, the horror, the shock all at once. And then the next thing I know, he's leaned over me, put me on a chokehold, grabbed me by the hair and dragged me along the corridor. And so the next thing, my hip is hitting one of the door frames. He opens this drawer like really forcefully. I hear lots of metal like banging against each other. And then I'm screaming at this point because he's got one of his hands off me, but he's still tagging at the roots of my hair. The rattling stops. And for a couple of like microseconds, there's a calm until I realize that it stopped because he'd grabbed a large kitchen knife and was holding it to my neck. And he was telling me, if you ever leave me, I'll kill you and your whole family. And that was the first experience of my dysfunctional dating, shall we say. Fortunately, obviously, I got out of that relationship with time. But I just want to emphasize this for those who also might have gone through an experience of physical abuse or psychological or emotional abuse. People say, well, why didn't you leave sooner? Because unfortunately, I'd love to tell you, Petra, that I left immediately. I didn't. There was a lot of brainwashing, a lot of threatening behavior that happened, and that I stayed in the relationship so much longer than I should have. But thank God, I eventually got out of it a couple of months later. And the sad thing is that wasn't the only dysfunctional relationship that I went on to experience. And so fast forward, I'm married, I've got a 4-month-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And again, that relationship was also very controlling. And I came home one day, he felt that it was inappropriate for me to come home at a certain time. So I had a curfew, and the curfew was 12 o'clock. And I think I came back home about 20 past 12 or something. Anyway, that broke out into one of our many, many arguments. Again, a lot of dysfunctional behavior in that relationship, and it signified the end of that marriage. And so at this point in my career, I had about 14 years working in the corporate world. I was doing a lot of business development globally, and I'd left that to do coaching. I was working as a life coach in central London, opened my own practice. And at this point, because I was on maternity leave, as I mentioned, my son was 4 months old, I decided I could, and to be honest and to be quite frank about, I understand postnatal depression is not something anybody chooses. But at that state of my life, and knowing that I had this little small baby and I had a 4-year-old, I did everything I possibly could in my power to avoid getting into postnatal depression. And so I then did a lot of other personal work on myself, my life, really evaluating, why do I have this pattern? Going from one bad dysfunctional relationship to another, staying in them so much longer than I should have stayed. And so a lot of what came up for me is that there were a lot of self-confidence issues, a lot of self-worth issues, lack of clarity of who I was, what I wanted, inability to set boundaries, quite a weakened mindset, to be very honest. And a way that I connected with people was a very unhealthy way of connecting. It was very like anxious, love me, do not leave me kind of attachment style that I had. And so that's how I decided, I'm absolutely sure there are loads of other women who are going through this. And if I can get out of that and come out so much happier, so much better, so much stronger, I wanted to help other women do the same. And so I pivoted into relationship coaching. And I did that for a while. COVID hit. And this was also quite an eye-opener for me. When COVID hit, as I mentioned, I'd geared my coaching to women only. When COVID hit, I started getting a lot more inquiries from men and from different countries around the world as well, from the US, Kenya, Pakistan. So that was also quite an eye-opener. Like, we're all in this together. It's not just women who suffer dysfunctional and abusive relationships. And I just want to highlight that as well, because I know men are slower to reach out for help in such cases. Just urging people, to, whatever culture you come from, because I know that's another issue when you talk about wellness. Religion as well can stop people from seeking help, gender, and so on. So that's how I ended up working as a relationship coach now. And I work with both women and men, fundamentally helping them to be empowered as an individual. So they learn how to attract and maintain happy, healthy relationships while being their authentic self and not being coerced into be somebody they're not.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. And like you touched on, I think women staying in dysfunctional relationships is actually a lot more common than we would think. And sometimes there is emotional issues, but there's also sometimes financial situations that don't allow women or men to leave relationships that are dysfunctional. So to consider that as well. And I'm just in awe of the journey that you have undertaken to be here with us today. So I hope this encourages listeners who may be experiencing the same situation or may have experienced the situation that they can move forward and they can heal through that. Now, how do you think that this journey that you've experienced in various dysfunctional relationships has helped you become a stronger person? Because we can maybe put this down to resilience or learning from the relationships, but just because a person is stuck in a dysfunctional relationship does not mean they're weak. So how would you define that strength that comes out when you go through these journeys?
I think you've made a really important point that it's not about shaming or blaming, right? It's not about weakness. There's a lot of different factors that are going on why people stay in dysfunctional relationships for as long as they do. I think for me, there were a couple of things that gave me my strength and continue to give me my strength. I'm a person of faith. So I think for me, I always say that God was my first reason of why I was able to be strong, and I'm continuing to rely on my faith for strength. And the other thing as well is I learned to love myself more. I realized is as much as I was saying, and we talk about that we value ourselves, we love ourselves, I didn't know how to do that on a very deep, fundamental level. And it's only until I was actually able to get to that stage in my life where I loved myself unconditionally, with my faults, with my mistakes, with my shortcomings, then I stopped beating up myself. I stopped telling myself that same old story of you've done this, you've done that, you've accepted that. Because I think getting rid of shame and guilt is a really important aspect of how to strengthen yourself. And until you learn to deal with that creeping voice of self-doubt, of pushing you down, will continue to creep up and have way more influence over your decision and your confidence and your strength and your self-worth than we sometimes realize.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I ask you at what point you decided that enough was enough? What was that point where you said to yourself, I need to make changes. I need to make a permanent change. Did that happen after several dysfunctional relationships, or was there a certain event that happened? When did you decide that you needed to make a change?
I think my children being there definitely were a huge factor. And Petra as well, I think it's a learning journey, right? So the biggest change, I think, was leaving, apart from that abusive relationship that I mentioned in my teens. But the other big change as well was in the marriage, because it's not an easy thing to walk out of from a cultural perspective, from a religious perspective. I'm a Black woman, Christian values from Kenya, the culture again. So there were all these things that piled up. And, I was taught, oh, but, that's just the way it is. You just have to be more submissive. You just have to be more submissive. I think the change came when I realized I'd lost so much of myself. I was operating on a level that is so far removed from who I wanted to be that I was just like, I can't live my life like this. I cannot get to the end of my life like this. And to be honest with you, for a while, I had this mindset. I don't have it anymore, but I guess it was a reaction of what I was going through, that I was intentionally not going to date anyone from backgrounds that I had this kind of mindset would put me back into that scenario. Now, obviously, with time, I was operating from a wounded and damaged place when I was making those decisions. Now I know it's not about the culture per se or the religion, it's about the individual. But I made that decision, I think, at the end of my marriage, when I knew I had to gather all the strength I possibly needed. As my son was growing as well, it became obvious that he was neurodiverse. And I had to do a lot of fighting for him to get the help that he needed. So I think there was a couple of things that it wasn't like an overnight decision. It was like an insight that I need to do something. And then what I needed to do came bit by bit, depending on what was going on. But it was definitely after my marriage that I decided, no, I cannot continue to exist like this.
Yeah. For someone looking in from the outside, there might be some obvious signs that a relationship is dysfunctional. So if we talk about physical, mental, emotional abuse, but when you're in the relationship, as you said, sometimes you begin to normalize the things that are happening and you begin to justify them as I just need to be more submissive or more accommodating or whatever it is that you tell yourself. So do you want to maybe Explain a little bit in your view, what are some of the things that aren't so obvious when you're in a relationship that are some flags that things aren't quite what they should be? I mean, physical abuse is obviously one of the absolute no-goes also, but is there anything else that might not be quite as obvious where the control kind of starts and you start feeling that it's just not a very good, solid relationship?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest ones is boundaries. When you continuously find yourself in a situation where your boundaries are crossed and you have made your boundaries clear as well. And I think this is also important to emphasize that you've communicated your boundaries, because we all have different boundaries. What is a boundary for me might not be for you, and vice versa. But if you have clearly communicated it and it continuously is broken, that is a warning sign. The other warning sign, I think, is when you start to feel like you're losing yourself, or people around you that love you and care for you start realizing that you're losing yourself, or you're becoming a different version of you, or you're turning into, whether it's a depressed or mean or kind of person, but something is off, like you're changing. So other people seeing it, you feeling it for yourself. And another big thing for me is just your instinct. I mean, there's a reason as human beings, we're born, even animals are born with instincts. Well, if you have an instinct within you, don't shove it off as it's nothing. It's there to protect you. Before we talked about the instinct protecting you from physical danger, whether you're going to be attacked by an animal or not. But now our instincts serve us as well from danger, but in a different kind of a way. But still, again, it could even be, we say that we're so easily able to trust our instinct when it's a physical danger that presents. Why don't we do that when it's an emotional danger that presents itself, or a psychological danger that presents itself? Why are we so quick to shove it off? Why are we so quick to make explanations and excuses for it? So that's another thing. And I think also when you find yourself explaining your partner's behavior to other people all the time, or trying to justify their behavior all the time, or making excuses for their behavior, that's also another red flag. It's not your responsibility to parent your partner. You know, you can make excuses for your children's bad behavior and then reprimand them and teach them better. But, you know, you should not be doing that for your partner. As a grown person, if it's a constant thing, again, it's your intuition telling you what they did or how they're behaving is out of order. You know it's out of order, and that's why you're trying to justify it. I think also if you find yourself feeling you're staying out of fear, and so this is not necessarily physical fears, because we talked about the physical abuse being a rather obvious one, but fear of loss. And that can look like, oh, I'm afraid to be alone. Or I'm afraid because I don't know the grass is greener on the other side. Or I'm afraid what other people are going to say that I have failed. And that for me actually was one of them. I was staying because I was afraid of what society and people around me would say, that I was divorced in my 30s. I had failed at my marriage. I felt I'd failed my children. Were they going to be raised as statistical divorcee children and all of that? So if you find yourself staying out of fear, whatever that fear looks like, and again, I don't say this dismissingly. I know that there are real financial impacts to a divorce. A lot of the times, and I know it goes for men as well, a lot of the times it is the woman who's taken a break in her career, or whose finances are going to suffer as a result of having children, more so than the man. Not always, but I think we can pretty much agree across the board, across the world, it's usually the woman who takes that burden of having her finances reduced and so on. And so again, that's another thing. And I can appreciate you're probably not just going to walk off without second consideration of what happens to your children financially. And maybe start having conversations with the right professionals, rather, people around you that you trust and that you know truly love you and want the best for you. So you can start putting something in place. But fear should not be something that holds you back.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I was actually just going to ask you if there are things that individuals can do to just start preparing. So if they have realized now in the back of their mind that their relationship may be abusive or dysfunctional, they are wanting to leave, but they're not quite ready. They don't know where to start. Are there things they can do to start preparing sort of in their own space, I don't want to say in secret, but maybe, just for themselves, for this eventuality that they may leave one day? Is there something they can do?
I think being able to get their understanding of their finances in order is really important, because I think that's also something else that really keeps people in a relationship longer than they want to be. Perhaps speak to, I'm sure your listeners are from different parts of the world, but like here in the UK, we've got something called Citizens Advice Bureau. So you can speak to them and see where you stand. Speak to a lawyer to see where you stand from a legal perspective. So even if it's a marriage in this case, if you did leave the marriage, how your assets would be split up to make sure that you're also provided for. This is now talking in the context of financial security. If you're not married, obviously that would not be an issue. But again, have the conversations and just plan ahead. Should I start looking for a job or a better job before, I leave, so I can have some financial security? Or where can I get financial assistance from? So that's on the financial side. I think on the emotional side, it could be worth talking to a therapist or a coach. You can reach out to me if you want to. I'm always happy to offer a 30-minute free coaching call, and I do that as well with my guest on my podcast. But I think seek help. We're never really alone. So let's not go through life being alone or existing like we are alone. I think I've hardly ever come across anyone who truly does not have anyone on their team whatsoever. There is a mother, a sister, a friend, a pastor, a rabbi, whatever it is. Reach out for people around your community and from an emotional perspective to get that. I think as well, you also want to have a very honest conversation with yourself about your level of self-worth and self-confidence, because it can be really hard to go through a divorce or separation when there are kids involved. So you don't want such a life-changing event to knock on a confidence or self-worth issue that is already quite low. It will make it so much harder for you to leave and stay removed from the relationship if it's an unhealthy relationship. This is when you find people saying they've left and they keep going back to the same dysfunction, the same person, even to make matters worse, again and again and again. And I've seen that in my friends and some family members. And looking at it, it's like you never really worked on your self-confidence and your self-worth. So you somehow subconsciously thought you couldn't find better and kept going back to the same dysfunction.
Yeah. So there's definitely some practical preparations and also some mental, emotional preparation to be done if you're considering leaving your relationship. So on the flip side of that, I would like to know what would make a great relationship then. So if we're looking at how do people know then that they are actually in a good relationship? So when they come out of all this dysfunction and they manage to heal and move on. So what makes a great relationship then?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it looks so different from person to person. But I'll share some, I think, universal truths that I think would apply across the board. And one of the things I find is that you're with someone who you have a strong, amazing friendship with. I've seen from my experience and my clients' experience, my friends, that my auntie who's been married, my parents, my mom, my stepdad as well, like there's a friendship. There's a really good friendship. They share stuff. They look forward to spending time together. They do stuff together. So that's a big one. And I think also having similar values. And what I'm talking about is like core values. So I'm not saying that you necessarily all want to do the same hobbies, but do you believe in being a kind person? Are you an ambitious person? And that is really important, that you want someone who is ambitious and not always going, yeah, that will do. Yeah, that will do. He's like, no, I want more. I want more. Or someone who is into personal development or whatever it is, whatever that looks like. But figure out what are your core values and do they align with the person that you're with? And you'll find if your core values align, it does tend to make a better match. And also communication. Oh, I cannot emphasize this one enough. We all know great relationships have to have great communication, but I think it goes more than just verbal communication. I think it's emotional communication, physical connection, and physical connection and emotional connection as well. So being able to be open, create an open and safe environment in your relationship where you can take anything to the table. You can discuss anything, no matter what it is. I'm not going to feel judged. I'm not going to feel like I'm silly. And that goes back to the friendship, right? Because if you are good friends with someone, you wouldn't criticize them for thinking in a particular way. Like, okay, might not agree with it, but let's have a conversation, babe, But being able to create that safe, secure environment. And then just turning up as a happy person. I have such a problem when people say, I want to be in a relationship because they're going to make me happy. It's like, no, stop. Make yourself happy. Let them make themselves happy. Come together and be happy together. It's such a burden to put on one person that they should make you happy or they should meet all your needs. That's another one, actually. Stop waiting for your partner to meet all your needs. Have a life outside your relationship. Have other friends, hang out with other friends, have other interests. And when you come together, you still have an amazing time together because you're not suffocating each other as well. And you're not relying on this one person to do all your hobbies with you, have all your emotional needs met, all your physical needs met, and everything, When I say physical needs, by the way, we all know there's a particular physical need that probably should be met by that just one person. Yes. Little caveat out there as I was hearing it out loud to myself. But hey, I'm not judging, each one to their own. But yeah, just to be clear, I'm not advocating for other things here. Yeah, so those are some of the things that I think would make for a great relationship.
Yeah, those are some great points. And I do agree that this happiness that we feel in life, it comes from inside of us. So waiting around for someone else to bring that to us might make that search very difficult for that other person to do that, right? So yeah, very great advice to go out and live your life to the fullest. And then you can share it with someone who will share that relationship with you as well. Mm-hmm. Now, as a relationship coach, you offer programs and services as well. So do you want to explain to our listeners a little bit about what you offer and how they could connect with you in their healing journey?
Sure. And thank you for the chance to do that, Petra. We really appreciate that. So I work with my clients in two different ways. I work with group coaching programs. I keep them small because it's obviously a sensitive topic when we're talking about relationships. I keep them to about 5, including myself in the group. And that's on a monthly subscription, if you like, for the group coaching sessions. They're done weekly and it's an hour long on Zoom. And I just want to emphasize that as well. Like at the moment, I'm not doing any face-to-face stuff. COVID has really just kind of changed my coaching practice, but I think it's done so for a lot of people out there. And the second way I work is also, again, through online, but this is a 13-week program. My program is built on 5 core pillars. But of course, because everyone is individual and why they come to me varies, I also tailor that to fit their exact needs. And the 5 core modules consist of, I call them the 5 C's: clarity, confidence, communication, connection, and change. And what that basically means is that I want my clients to move from a state of not being confident and not being clear about who they are, not being able to set boundaries and communicate effectively, having issues with how they connect with people, to a changed mindset where they're able to function at their best, highest, confident, I know myself kind of manner. And what that basically does, it helps people to stop wasting their time, their money, their efforts, heartbreak, mental health, physical health, on the wrong people, on the wrong environment, on dysfunction, and instead learn to move to a place where they start attracting and maintaining happy, healthy relationships. And I also have to emphasize, for me, it's really important for the authentic bit, because, like to your question, what makes a great relationship? That looks very different from person to person. So that's why I talked about tailoring it to the client. It's not like picked off the shelf and everyone follows the exact same module.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And what wonderful work you do and what you offer for clients as well. Wow. And Anne also has her own podcast called The Love You Want. It starts with you. And you can listen in from your favorite podcast provider. And we will be linking to all of Anne's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can get in touch with her and how you can listen to her podcast. We'll be putting all of that in the show notes for you. Well, this has been another incredible episode. And I really hope our listeners have enjoyed this journey into overcoming dysfunctional relationships as much as I have. I've learned so much again in the last half hour that we've spent together. And I hope that this has been helpful for our listeners and they've gained a lot of value from our conversations. It has been fantastic chatting with you on the podcast today, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Petra, for giving me this chance to be part of your podcast. I'm really, really privileged, and I'm really excited to listen in, and I hope people got some value from it as well. Thank you again.
Absolutely. I do hope that they reach out as well if they would like to talk to someone and explore possibilities in their relationships or talk it out with you. So I hope that people reach out and connect with you and your wisdom there. So thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for tuning in today, and take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please subscribe, share on social media, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the Journey blog. Sending you love and courage, and see you next week.